Hello and welcome back to the third episode of Philosophy Pupils. I'm D and we have G and V here with us, and today we are going to be talking about the trolley problem, one of the more famous philosophical dilemmas, and it deals especially in ethics, dealing with what might be right or wrong. So just to give a quick refresher on what the trolley problem may be, the trolley problem essentially has you as the conductor of a railroad company, and the way the railroad works is that it kind of splits it to a Y direction. So one goes one way and it splits off into another direction. Usually it'll go onto the left track, the train, if you leave the lever by default, but you do have a lever which you can switch to make the train go right if you need it to go right. So everything's all well and good until one day you notice that a train that has no driver is kind of speeding down the track and it's gonna barrel down the left lane. Also, you think, okay, but at least no one's on the train, so there's no danger of it crashing. But you notice that there are actually 5 people tied down onto the left lane of the track, meaning that if you don't do anything, the train's gonna run those 5 people over. Obviously, you grab the lever and you're about to switch it, making it go to the right, when you realize that there's actually one person tied down onto the track on the right as well. So meaning, if you don't do anything, don't pull the lever, then the train is going to go and hit the 5 people, which will most certainly kill them. On the other hand, if you do consciously make that decision to pull that lever, switch the train to the right, it's going to hit and kill that one person. So the trolley problem asks, what would you do, and more importantly, which would be the ethical choice, to either pull the lever or not do anything at all? Well, what do you think, guys? What would you guys do?
I think for me, the ethical choice to do would be to pull the lever and to only kill one person versus 5. I think that's a utilitarian standpoint where you only kill one person rather than 5 people. So it's a net benefit for us.
I would probably do the same because the counterpart to utilitarianism, deontology, which states that some actions are evil no matter what their benefits are, I think it still supports the choice in this case because, like, whether you think about it or not, you're going to be responsible for the deaths anyway. Even if you don't pull the lever physically, you're basically responsible for the deaths of the 5 people. Like, you let them die.
Right.
So in this case, obviously, it's a choice between 2 evils. Pick the lesser evil and have one person die.
Pull the lever.
Yeah.
I kind of agree with that as well. Before we move on, though, just in case we want to bring it up later, I actually took the time to look up the definition of ethics on Merriam-Webster dictionary, just to see what the dictionary might say, and it's very interesting. The first definition was relating to ethics, so not that useful in the context of this discussion, but the second definition was involving or expressing moral approval or disapproval, ethical judgments. But what was interesting to me was that the third definition was conforming to accepted standards of conduct. That was one possible definition for ethics. So interesting. Perhaps maybe that ethics is what the majority of people believe in, that your individual input has no impact. I don't know. So right now, all 3 of us would have pulled the lever. You know, obviously you don't want to kill a person if possible, but faced with 1 life versus 5, you would have pulled the lever if you had to do so. But let's consider if the train going left or right, it's just a straight track. And it's same thing as before, there's 5 people, meaning that if you don't do anything, it's going to run the 5 people over. Obviously, you don't want that. But you notice that standing next to you is a person. You notice that if you had shoved the person in front of the train, would be enough to stop the train to prevent those 5 people from getting run over. So the question here is, are you going to push that person in front of the train, thereby saving the 5 people, or would you not push the person in front of the train, thereby the 5 people get run over?
Well, if you're going by the same logic, then you would push the man because it's essentially the same thing as killing the one person for pulling the lever in the first scenario. So the difference from the man and the lever should not affect your decision whatsoever.
Well, yes, logically that is sound, but we must recall humans are not always logical, especially in extreme situations such as these. I think logically, yes, it would be consistent to push him, but one thing that could deter many people is the fact that you're going to have to look the person in the eyes as you do it and physically push them.
Like you feel bad about it.
You feel the guilt.
There's not that element of physical detachment or emotional detachment when you're just pulling a lever and just taking someone's life who you've never seen before.
However, I would, just playing the devil's advocate here, some people do argue that letting someone die versus killing someone do constitute different moralities of wrongness. For example, you know, when you pull that lever in the original scenario to redirect the train, that one person on the track their death is not directly related to the train saving the 5 people.
You
just pulled the lever, right? Whereas when you push the person's death actually has to happen in order for the 5 people to be killed. You're using the person's life. I think Immanuel Kant in his categorical imperative brings that up with that deontology, that you cannot use a person's life as a means to an end, or that it would be morally wrong to do so.
Well, in a way, if you don't take their life and you allow the 5 people to be killed, aren't you technically using their lives in a way to satisfy your own your own conscience?
Your own conscience, okay. I think I'd have to kind of side with the utilitarian principles here, in that greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people, 5 people, is the quote-unquote moral thing to do.
Yeah. Well, even with the ontology, you could argue that letting 5 people die when you could have saved them is still a despicable act. So, according to the ontology, the right thing to do would be to commit the less evil act.
Okay. Okay, good. The last twist here, before we move on, all of us are kind of in unison on this, but I just wanted to point out that when they did this with people, they found out that most people would pull the lever to save the 5 people. However, a lot of them actually flipped their position, and they actually said they wouldn't push the man into the train, despite them saying they would pull the lever in the first scenario. So just keep that in mind, because I'm going to bring it back to the last one, see if anyone's opinion might change. Let's say that you had the man next to you, but you realized that the man was actually the person who put those 5 people on the tracks in the first place. They have no guilt, the person's very happy that those 5 people are going to get hit by a train, which is a despicable thing. However, so that you find out that the person is not an innocent person staying next to you. They were the instigator for this scenario in the first place. They're the people who caused the train to go running towards those 5 people. Now, I know we said that we would have pushed the man into the train in order to save the lives of those 5 people, but I guess this question is, do you think that it eases your conscience a little bit if you had realized that the person was in charge of causing this scenario in the first place? And do you think most people would be more okay with pushing the man into the train if they were the ones who had started this scenario?
I think most people would be okay with it. It's because with the principle of you got what you deserve, you caused these people to be on the track, so you deserve to be pushed. But logically, of course, it shouldn't change your decision of whether to push the person or not.
1 life versus 5.
Well, another interesting take on this is that even though you might say that you're more emotionally detached when you're pulling the lever, so it's easier to do it, one thing that you might take into account is if you're physically pushing the person onto the tracks, you have the opportunity to, even if briefly, kind of justify what you're doing and explain to them, kind of say goodbye to them. So in a way, that could make it morally easier for you to do, because you will at least tell a person, hey, I'm sorry I have to do this, please forgive me, your soul, or whatever.
Making yourself feel the guilt at least justifies some of the harm that you've done to the person.
Okay. So at least they don't die, not knowing why.
Okay. Well, a related problem actually that a close associate of us gave us right before the podcast for us to cover was Heinz Dilemma, which was one of the problems that the psychologist Kohlberg came up with. Let me just read out the dilemma for you. And it has to do similarly with ethical problems. If, in Europe, a woman was near death from a special kind of cancer, there was one drug that the doctors thought might save her. It was a form of radium that a druggist in the same town had recently discovered. The drug was expensive to make, but the druggist was charged 10 times than what the drug had cost him to make. He paid $400 for the radium and charged $4,000 for a small dose of the drug. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, from which the dilemma is named after, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money and tried every legal means possible. However, he could only get about $2,000, which is half of what it cost. He told the druggist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell it cheaper or to let him pay it later. But the druggist said, no, I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it. So, having tried every legal means possible, Heinz gets desperate and considers breaking into the man's store to steal the drug for his wife, who is near death from a special kind of cancer. So, first question, do you think Heinz should steal the drug? Why or why not?
This is a really tough question because you have to look at it from the perspective of Heinz and the person selling the drug. Obviously, if you're looking from the perspective of the person selling the drug, obviously Heinz should not steal it because it was his own product and he put his life's effort into creating this drug to supposedly help other people. So obviously, he wants to have the profit. On the other hand, denying Heinz the right to buy the medicine and pay it back later isn't the most moral thing you could do as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one factor why Heinz decides to steal the drug in the first place. He offers to buy it for him and then buy it from him and then pay it back later, but the dealer says no.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with those considerations, Heinz should steal a drug because he has tried everything he possibly can, and he wants to save his wife as much as possible, so he should do it.
I think that, yes, I agree with you that Heinz should steal the drug. And I'm going to bring in utilitarianism into this. The druggist, if we consider what happens. So the druggist wants to make money, sure. But that's going to be for him and his family. And the worst case scenario is that they lose out on $3,600 of profit. This is something that they could lower. The problem states that it costs them only $400 to make it, and yet they're charging 10 times more. They could charge, 2 to 3 to 5 times more. It's not like they have to do 10 times for this scenario. However, if they don't get the drug, if Heinz does not get the drug, then his wife is going to die, and obviously the grief brought onto the family by the wife's passing is going to be a lot worse. I think it's comparing that $3,600 versus a person's life, especially when you consider the grief it might bring on one family versus the loss of profits in another. I think if you're considering it in the terms of what brings the greatest amount of happiness to the greatest amount of people, stealing that drug is ultimately going to overall result in more happiness. Which is, I have to go with Heinz.
Yeah, and even if you mentioned utilitarianism, even if you look at it from the perspective of deontology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some actions are just simply evil. The moral burden, you could argue, and some probably would argue, that the moral burden in this situation actually rests on the seller.
Okay.
Because he made the conscious decision knowing that she is most likely going to die if he doesn't cut his profit in half and only take an 80% profit margin.
Yeah.
So technically, he instigated this whole thing and he bears the primary burden for it.
Yeah.
So, and then you compare that to what Heinz would do if he steals it. He is stealing something from him, but the guy denied it knowing that it would cost a human life.
Mm-hmm.
So you could argue, even with the ontology, that potentially killing someone for profit, or not killing, but letting them die intentionally when you have the cure, could be worse than stealing the cure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for listening to today's episode, and I hope we'll see you again next time.